Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Museum Center's Boozy Brunch. We are excited to have you all here. And I just have a couple things to go over before we get started on our delicious Bloody Mary cocktail. Please keep yourself muted. If you haven't already, mute yourself. We have the ingredients listed that you'll need today in the chat. And if you have any questions, please just put those in the chat and we will address those as well. And if you forget something or need to refer back, just scroll up and you can see ingredients there. And I also linked the website from where this recipe is from, if you'd like to scroll and check that out as well. We want to welcome Rick Perillo all the way from Los Angeles, joining us here today, which is so cool. He's going to share with us some of his passion around garden education and permaculture and, of course, cocktails. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We also have two resident scientists and museum center staff here to share some delicious food science with us and interject as necessary and make a cocktail with us. So welcome, Brian.
And we're getting some nasty feedback. I'm not sure if that's on your end or Rick's end.
I hear it too. I have my headphones in.
All right.
That's kind of cool. Sorry about that. I don't know how to fix it. I'll talk slower and hurry up at the same time because your guys' mics are working great. So, oh, the joys of technology. So you're welcome to sit back and relax and just follow along. Or if you have the recipe and the ingredients and you want to make this with us, we'll go slow enough so you can do that. Again, if you have any questions, just put those in the chat and we can follow up. With that, though, I'm going to turn it over to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. Still getting some of the feedback. Just going to wait for that feedback to... Okay, that's better. So I'm getting this feedback. I just want to figure that out first.
Rick, can you turn down your volume?
Turn my volume down?
Yeah, just as low as you can stand.
Okay, how's that?
That's much better.
How can you hear me now?
Yep, we're good. Can you hear us?
Okay. My volume's kind of low, so I'll just have to turn it up at certain points if people have questions. So thank you, Erin, for that introduction. My name is Rick, and I am a gardener from Los Angeles. I teach gardening full-time to everyone from elementary students to high school students. Is the feedback still happening? A little bit? Maybe I'll just turn it down all the way. How about now? If I just turn it down all the way, is it okay? Okay, I can't hear you guys at all, so I'll just kind of pause once in a while for Erin, Brian, and Jacob to jump in. So again, I'm Rick Perillo from Los Angeles. I teach gardening and I run the website, The Carrot Revolution. I'm a regenerative gardener, meaning I practice gardening techniques that instead of kind of taking from the land, give back to the land. So my focus is on gardening in such a way that helps build healthy soil, helps sequester carbon from the atmosphere, helps create healthy habitat and healthy ecosystems for animals and insects, and also helps grow more nutrient-dense food. We're going to be talking about a Bloody Mary, one of my favorite cocktails today. I am not a barista by trade in any way. I'm a gardener, but I do like to drink, and I find that the garden is a great place to get inspiration for new drinks. So the recipe we're going to make today uses fresh garden tomatoes. This is a great time of year to do this recipe because where I am, and I imagine it's kind of similar to where you are in Cincinnati, we've had a lot of tomatoes all summer, and our tomato season's starting to come to an end. As soon as we get that first frost at night, our tomato plants are kind of going to be shot. So it's a good idea right now to be picking all your tomatoes, and this is a great way to use a lot of your tomatoes. We're going to start off by making some tomato juice. So this is going to be a lot different than like the store-bought V8. This is going to be fresh tomato juice. And I'm going to be using 3 pounds of garden tomatoes to make that juice. I want to dive right into the recipe because we are going to have some chopping and some cooking time in the recipe. And so while we're chopping and while we're cooking, I would love to have a conversation and hear some questions. So if you have questions, please just type them into the chat and Aaron can read those to us. And then myself, Brian, or Jacob can answer those questions. So the first thing we're going to do with our tomatoes is we're going to core them, meaning kind of taking out this middle part, roughly chop them. They don't need to be chopped too fine because we're going to kind of cook them all down anyway. And as we chop them up, we're going to throw them into a saucepan. Now, this is important, and Brian or Jacob can maybe elaborate on this, but it's important that you use a non-reactive pan. Tomatoes are very acidic, and they'll react with certain metals like aluminum. So stainless steel is an ideal pan to use. So while we chop these, go ahead and just pop any questions you might have about any of that into the chat.
So I'm going to pop myself on here for a second just to go over a little bit of that. So aluminum is normally pretty inert in the pan because of a layer of aluminum oxide. So it's not actually bare aluminum. Aluminum oxidizes as soon as it hits the atmosphere, like almost immediately. But that oxidized layer is broken down by acidic things like acidy tomatoes. So you get back to bare aluminum pretty quickly if you're doing that. And you don't really want bare aluminum there. But stainless steel has a layer of chromium oxide on the outside that does not break down when it's acidic. So it makes it a non-reactive pan. There's a couple other things you could do, like enameled pans work pretty okay for this. But something like cast iron is not great because you can get down into the bare iron and it'll erode really fast, and then you get rust. So that's why it's important to use that sort of non-reactive pan for this one.
So part of that reactiveness is also seen when you put it in your Tupperware. I'm sure we've all had this issue where we put tomato sauce or some type of red sauce in a plastic Tupperware. That's actually a lot of the proteins being left behind in your Tupperware. So a couple of ways that you can get that out is actually baking soda. The baking soda will react with the acid residue that you've left behind, and it'll help you kind of get that film off a little bit quicker. Also, really good soap helps.
So I'm not going to be, I have my tomatoes here, but I'm not going to be chopping along with you because I put in a grocery order and then I went backpacking and I thought I was ordering 3 pounds of tomatoes and came back to 3 total tomatoes. So unfortunately, I don't have enough tomatoes to chop along with you and make my recipe. So I am cheating today. To my great disappointment, but I'll be using store-bought tomato juice. I also missed our farmer's market this week because it was the same day I went backpacking. So sadly, I can't have that. But I am excited for the recipe anyway because I think the recipe is great. And I personally absolutely love a Bloody Mary. It is one of my favorite drinks. So I'm excited for this one. I actually drink... Most of the time, I just drink a Virgin Mary. I don't typically go for vodka in my Bloody Marys. I just absolutely love the taste of it. And it's one of my favorite airplane drinks for some reason. And I think it's because, when you're on an airplane, when you're up at altitude, your taste buds are a little bit dulled. So having that like spiciness and powerful flavor is just a lot. It cuts through a little bit better. So that's why like Bloody Marys and like ginger ale, I think seem to be really popular on planes because they're a little bit stronger flavor and it kind of cuts through a little bit. So one of the most requested food items for astronauts is hot sauce because it's a little bit more difficult for them to taste things at higher altitudes, lower pressures. So going for spicy food just gives them a little bit more flavor. I always think of that every time I'm on a plane and I'm looking for something to drink. Something spicy sounds real nice.
And I actually am a bit of an overachiever, and I already pre-made all of my Bloody Marys for the day. So Rick, I actually modified your recipe a little bit. I blended in a little bit of kale, and I actually blended the celery and then added a stalk of celery, but I added some kale and some ginger root. So I totally recommend adding ginger root to your recipe. It's pretty good.
I love that. Give it some spice.
Yeah, I usually add some ginger to mine too. I've not had it with horseradish before. I usually go ginger, but I'm putting in the horseradish today, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, you can add all sorts of things to this. I mean, the tomato juice we're going to make is pretty basic tomato juice. You can certainly add all sorts of like greens to it, give it more nutrients, spices like horseradish or even peppers if you like it spicy. We're going to add some of that into the Bloody Mary recipe. But like it's great to make this in advance, and you can store it in the fridge for about 1 week. You can store it in the fridge, the tomato juice. And unless you want to can it, which it's kind of too big of a topic to talk about today, but you could put this into a mason jar, give it a hot water bath, and then can it, and that be a way to preserve your tomatoes so that you could have fresh tomato juice in the winter.
So to answer your question, Aaron, the reason that people, or at least in my experience, the reason that people put so many different things in a Bloody Mary is usually because it's a breakfast drink. And so you just kind of, whatever's on the breakfast table, you could pretty much add into it. I've seen people add whole strips of bacon. Celery is pretty common, olives. There's a few people that I know that will actually kind of dip like light doughed pancakes into their Bloody Marys. It's a Louisiana thing. Louisiana people eat very strange things, but there's definitely very interesting variations. There's a few people that make them, they freeze them, and they make almost like a Bloody Mary daiquiri type thing. Those are very interesting. You can also make them into popsicles if you try really hard. It takes a little bit, but there are a few people that I know that during the summertime, they will make virgin Bloody Mary popsicles, and they will have it for like a cookout. And so you can just pull them out of an ice chest and have them with steak or burgers or, whatever you're eating.
That's amazing. I think another reason that people get so excited is because there aren't a lot of savory cocktails. So, we've sort of exhausted the list of things that go into sweet drinks and taste good, like citrus rinds and things like that. But a Bloody Mary is savory, so you can put bacon in it. Or you can put like all these other vegetables that aren't as sweet that might taste a little funny in something else, like pickles or pickled green beans or something. And it tastes so much better, and it's gardeny. It's just so you can almost make a salad out of the whole thing, which is fun too.
Yeah. You drink your vegetables in the cocktail. So I'm getting to, what I'm doing. I have my tomatoes kind of chopped roughly. They're in my stainless steel pot. I'm adding 2 tablespoons of sugar to the pot just to kind of cut through some of that acidity. I'm also going to add a teaspoon of salt and a little bit of black pepper. I'm going to cook that on medium till you kind of see those tomatoes start to boil a bit, then turn it low for a simmer. And we're going to let it simmer for roughly like 15 minutes. So you see that's kind of turning to juice. And just kind of keep an eye on it. We're going to give it an occasional stir so that the bottom doesn't burn. And while that's cooking, I have a slideshow that I want to show that's kind of going to go into a bit of the history of tomatoes, a bit of how to grow them, and a bit of like tomato folklore. So again, pop any questions while we're going through this into the chat, and we'll be happy to take those. So I am going to share a screen. Let's see. Aaron, I can't share my screen. It says too many video sources. Can we turn one of those off? Let's see if I could share. Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Okay, the world of tomatoes. This is a guy that comes into my garden sometimes to take my tomatoes. So he's holding a sun gold tomato, which is like one of the sweetest tomatoes I know. It's a hybrid tomato, and we'll talk a little bit more later in this presentation about what that means. But it's like a very sweet cherry tomato. So a few things about the history. Tomatoes, Italian cuisine. It actually originated in South America in the Andes Mountains, but the original plants would not have been very different than what we think of today. It would have been small little tomatoes, probably nowhere near as sweet as the ones we have today. But over many years, starting with the Mayans, they were kind of bred by humans and domesticated into what we think of today. By the 16th century, tomatoes had kind of started to spread around the world, but they were very slow to be accepted into Europe and North America. Largely, there was a lot of idea that tomatoes were poisonous, which is interesting because tomatoes are in the nightshade family, and the nightshade family does have many poisonous plants. And in fact, the leaves of the tomato plant are slightly toxic. Other members of the nightshade family are potato, which the leaves are also toxic. Peppers, eggplant, same thing. You don't want to be eating the leaves on those. And I actually have a friend who is allergic to the entire nightshade family. He can't eat any of those things. So there still is a certain amount of toxicity in this plant family. I don't know if that's something that Brian and Jacob might know more about.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the toxins that are in there are basically to deter insects and stuff from eating them. So it's, the fruits themselves are often fine for a lot of things in the family. And potato is also, it's a sort of a special case because it's a tuber. It's actually a root that you're eating. And the toxins just don't happen to be in there in the fully mature plant. But plant toxins are super common, even in lots of things that we eat. The theobromine in chocolate and caffeine in coffee are also toxins that are meant to deter animals from eating those plants. Just humans happen to be specially adapted for those. But we can't handle the toxins in a lot of the nightshade family. So we just have to be careful of which parts of the plant we're eating.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, is it tomato a fruit or a vegetable? That often pops up as like a point of controversy. And the reason is a botanist and a chef define fruit and vegetable very differently. But for a botanist or a gardener, a fruit is any fruiting part of the plant, meaning the part that has seeds. So a tomato would be a fruit, as well as a pumpkin, a zucchini, an eggplant. Those would all be fruits to a gardener. And that actually did go to the Supreme Court, but the reason was fruits and vegetables were taxed differently. So there was a tax issue that went to the Supreme Court. And out there's a few other fun facts about tomatoes. Americans eat at least 12 million tons of tomatoes a year. That picture is from that festival in Spain where people throw tomatoes at each other once a year. All right, let's jump into a little bit into the language of tomatoes. So there is largely two categories of growth when we talk about tomato plants: determinate and indeterminate. And determinate are tomato plants that they grow and they kind of produce all their tomatoes at once in one big burst, and then they die off. Versus indeterminate, these are the tomato plants that will just grow and grow and grow. And if you kind of provide them support like a trellis, they can get really tall. I mean, I've seen them like up to 7 feet tall, and they'll keep producing tomatoes throughout the year until we get that hard frost. Tomatoes do not like cold weather. So as soon as we get that really cold night, they'll die off, but they'll keep kind of growing until that happens. And then there's tomatoes are divided into the size of the fruit. So cherry or grape tomatoes really just refers to a small tomato, whereas beefsteak refers to the larger tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes are great, not only for their taste, but if you live in northern climates, like in Cincinnati, the cherry tomatoes tend to produce earlier than like the big tomatoes. So sometimes if you live somewhere that has a shorter growing season, a shorter summer, cherries are a good choice. And I want to dive a little bit into the terms heirloom, hybrid, and GMO, and maybe I'll pause, and Jacob and Brian, I'm sure, could expand a lot more on this. So there's a lot of different definitions for heirloom, what that means. It's loosely defined, but typically it refers to a plant variety that is at least 50 years old. Largely refers to plants that have kind of been, the seeds and the varieties have been passed down through communities or families. And what's important is the seeds are stable, meaning if you have an heirloom tomato variety and you save seeds from it and grow those seeds out, those seeds will produce that same variety. Now compare that to hybrid. So hybrid is a mix of two things. So you kind of mix two different tomato plants and you get a hybrid. Now the problem is if you save seeds from that hybrid and then plant them next year, you really don't know what kind of plant you're going to get. It could be all sorts of things. So I mentioned earlier, like these sun gold tomatoes, the little sweet cherry tomatoes that are orange, those are hybrids. So I can't save seeds from those. I buy those every year. Whereas a tomato heirloom, like a Cherokee purple, I could grow and I could save the seeds from every year. As long as those plants didn't cross-pollinate with another plant, I could save those seeds and plant them out next year. Don't confuse hybrid with GMO. That's a genetically modified organism. GMOs are something that happens in a lab where they're actually mixing genes from usually different species, like inserting the genes from a bacteria into a corn plant. That can never happen naturally in nature. That only happens in a lab. And maybe Brian and Jacob want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so as far as tomatoes are concerned, there are no commercially available GMO tomatoes right now, but there are quite a lot of GMO products out there. I think probably the one that's made the news the most in the US is corn. And the purpose there really is to make a corn that is resistant to Roundup, is the sort of the primary one. And the purpose of that is basically so you can spray your field and plant your corn kind of at the same time. You have to use a lot less of the sort of herbicide chemicals if you're going to do that, but the purpose is to make that readily available. There's also corns that produce their own pesticide as part of a GMO. So sometimes it's for the benefit of farmers. There's also GMOs like golden rice, which has vitamin B in it, which is being used in a lot of really poor areas in Africa and in Asia, because vitamin B deficiency is really common in some of those areas and can lead to blindness. So this golden rice is being developed and distributed there to sort of address a public health crisis. GMO is kind of a mixed bag as far as public perception is concerned, but typically farmers are big fans because it's cheaper to grow and things like that. With tomatoes specifically, we don't have any GMOs. We do have hybrids and specially selected tomato plants looking for specific things. So one of the really notable changes that people have selected for is something called uniform ripening. So I have some Roma tomatoes here, and you can see they are like uniform red all over the place. So they're pretty bright red when they're ripe, and they don't have any what's called a green shoulder where it attaches to the stem. And these are pretty stable. They'll keep for a relatively long time on a shelf, and they look really nice as a presentation in the grocery store. The problem comes in, though, when you think of flavor. So Roma is actually a pretty good flavor when it's ripe, but there's some other tomatoes where they've selected for this what's called a uniform ripening gene. And this is not done through genetic modification. It's just done by selective breeding and keeping the seeds of the tomatoes that have the best appearance. And just because of an accident of genetics, the genes that code for uniform ripening, in other words, ripening and turning red at the stem area, are very, very closely associated with the genes for sugar production. So tomatoes that have been selected to look bright red often tend to be less sweet, which is almost counter to what you'd expect. So it's kind of an accident of that. It's what happens with that. One of the benefits of genetic modification is that you can target only the uniform ripening or the shelf stability without touching the sweetness. Again, that's not been done in tomatoes, but sort of just an accident of that kind of thing. Tomatoes, we're lucky that you can buy certain tomatoes, keep the seeds, and plant them again. You can't do that with a lot of fruits. You couldn't do that with an apple. Apple seeds from a Macintosh apple do not grow Macintosh apple trees. Every single Macintosh apple tree is a clone. And that's true for oranges, lemons, limes, pretty much all the citrus family. It's true for apples. It's true for loads and loads and loads of tree-based fruits, is that they mostly are just clones, and you can't just buy the seeds of a Macintosh apple tree and plant them. You have to graft it onto a different tree. So, but tomatoes were mostly lucky, and they, with the exception of the hybrids, you can save the seeds and plant them again. How are we doing on our tomatoes? We getting close?
Yeah. So my volume back down. So my tomato juice is about ready. So I'm gonna turn off my heat right now and give it a chance just to cool down a little bit before I strain it. And while that's cooling down, just like a few more notes on what we were just talking about, mentioning the tomato seeds. I've also noticed tomato seeds are very viable. Meaning, like the 3 year tomatoes are compost. You spend 3 months, the compost heats up, breaks down, you spread the compost, and tomato plants still pop up. Like I find tomato seeds more than probably any other seed seems to like be able to outlive the compost pile. Also, when you have seeds, seeds kind of lose their viability or their ability to sprout the older they get. So for example, lettuce seeds, I find by the time a pack of lettuce seeds is about 5 years old, they don't sprout very well. Maybe a few will sprout in there. Whereas tomato seeds, I don't even know how long they could go and they'll still sprout. Like I've never totally tested it, but I sprouted 10-year-old tomato seeds. They seem to stay stable and live for a lot longer. And then just also to come back to GMOs, because there's a lot of confusion on GMOs. They're only available to farmers right now, as far as seeds go. Right now, that could change in the future, but right now, you and I cannot go and buy GMO seeds for our garden. Though, if you do want to be like extra careful around GMOs and support companies that don't support GMOs, there is something called the Safe Seed Pledge, which a number of seed companies have signed on to, saying they will not sell GMO seeds to farmers. They just don't deal with GMO seeds. So let's move on to the presentation, and maybe I'll pause for a second before we jump into growing tomatoes, just to see if Aaron has any questions in the chat for us.
Yeah, it looks like right now we've got some comments from people who always find tomatoes and pumpkins growing in their compost. And I can speak for Jacob. I think you might want to unplug your headphones and plug them back in. You get some buzz. But yeah, I have a cherry tomato plant growing up inside my mint because there were some just cherry tomatoes seeds apparently in the compost, and it's growing up right between my mint plants right now. So.
Yeah, I've noticed that with pumpkins and squash as well. They also do seem to sprout very easily and kind of survive the compost. All right, let's kind of move quickly through growing tomatoes. So planting with all the varieties, and I've heard different estimates on how many tomato varieties are out there. Kind of depends who you talk to, but I've heard anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 tomato varieties. So there's a lot to choose from. So you want to start with varieties you like to eat. Like Romas are really good for sauce making. If you're really into just snacking on like tomatoes, the cherry tomatoes are great. The beef steaks, the big ones are good for sandwiches or tomato salads. And then, so choose ones you want to eat, and choose ones that are good for your local climate. So I mentioned earlier, like you live in climates with shorter seasons, early ripening ones, or cherry tomatoes are good for northern climates. Maybe you only have a balcony to garden on. There's actually ones that have been bred to be smaller plants that will do better in pots. I think there's even one with the word balcony in it, like balcony surprise or something like that. That's kind of specific for pots. Next, you want to prep your soil. So first, choose a spot that gets at least 6 hours of sun a day. 8 hours would be more ideal. Prep your soil, kind of prep it deep, about a foot deep, amend it with compost or some sort of soil amendment. Plant them. We mentioned the frost will definitely kill them. So you want to plant them outdoors when you're sure that frost is over. So I'm not sure what that is in Cincinnati. In LA, by the beginning of March, there's really no more fear of frost. So we could start planting outside, if not even earlier, sometimes as early as February. We're able to plant tomatoes. You know, I imagine it's like maybe April where you are. I'm not totally sure. Give them at least 3 feet between plants to grow. So again, we're thinking about their mature size, and they could get pretty large. Water them in after you've transplanted them. And then provide something for them to climb on. The fruits get too heavy for the branches and it will break the branches. And also if the plants are kind of growing on the ground and all that fruit's on the ground, it just provides too much opportunity for slugs and bugs to come and eat the fruit. So provide it with some sort of trellis to climb on, or you could buy tomato cages, or you can make your own out of really any sort of repurposed material. For harvesting, they will ripen off the vine, but for optimal flavor, harvest when they are ripe. So there's a few different ways to know that. One, they've totally changed color. 2, when you squeeze them, they'll have a little bit of give. They won't be mushy, but they won't be firm. You kind of push into them a little bit. And 3rd, they should pop off the vine really easily. If you really have to tug, they're probably not ready yet. So when they're ripe, they come off pretty easily. And then this is a big one for me. Do not put them in the fridge. I always see people putting tomatoes in the fridge, but like it really alters the flavor. Just store them outside, out on your counter in a cool place. And I'm sure Brian or Jacob could talk a little bit more about why the fridge changes their flavors like that.
Yeah, this is my biggest complaint about grocery store tomatoes is I think they're very often refrigerated before they're put out, and it just completely kills the flavor. I actually don't know the specifics on this one. I'm not sure, Jacob, if you looked into the specifics of the reaction that does it, but it just kills the sweetness completely. And if they get too cold, they don't even have to freeze, just a little bit on the cold side in the fridge. It can change their texture a lot too. They get really mealy. Very, very disappointing when you get a cold tomato. I think that for whatever reason, cherry tomatoes at the grocery store seem like they haven't been refrigerated, but all the rest of the varieties do. So those are the only ones that I really am happy with when I go to the grocery store. Try to go farmer's market as much as I can for tomatoes.
Okay. I stopped sharing my screen. We're back to we could see each other. Yeah, can everyone see me okay?
Oh,
yeah,
okay, awesome.
Yeah, we're all good.
Okay, so the
okay, I had my sound down again.
Wait, what?
Go ahead, Jacob.
Can we hear me?
I think you're
Am
good.
I good? Okay.
Yep.
So the reason that the tomato flavor changes is it has to do with the actual savoriness. So that is called umami flavor, and that's actually a direct result of the glutamates in the tomato. So when you store it in the fridge, you're actually preventing the glutamates from being able to react with their normal environment. So as the glutamates stop reacting, you basically kill the savoriness of the tomato. Hilariously enough, there was one genetically modified tomato, and it was the first genetically modified food allowed in the United States. It doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be commercially available, and it was called the Flavor Saver tomato. Not kidding, that's a real thing. It was taken off shelves because there was some issue with it. It was designed to stay forever ripe, and I think part of the issue was that it was no longer a food, and it was more of just like a forever ripe thing that lost all of its nutritional value. Another fun thing, the town that claims tomatoes in the United States is Rolandsburg, Ohio. they're the ones that claim that they brought mass tomatoes to the American markets. So that is some of the fun, savory science involved with tomatoes.
Brian and Jacob, I love having you guys here because I do not know all the science that you guys know. I actually people always assume I have like a botany background. I have an English literature degree, so it's great having some scientists here. So let's wrap up the recipe so we could get to drinking. So your tomatoes should have cooked. I've let them cool down a little bit on the stovetop. Again, it's great if you make your tomato juice in advance so you could store it in the fridge and really chill it. For today, it's going to be a little warm, but we're going to put it on ice, which will cool it down. So you can kind of see in my pot, you can see the tomatoes. I am going to put them through a fine mesh sieve into a bowl, being careful because they're hot. And we're just straining out all those skins and the seeds. You could use cheesecloth if you have it for this. I'm taking a wooden spoon and kind of pushing down on it to really get all of that juice out. I mean, the sad part of this is you take like 3 pounds of your good garden tomatoes, and then you look at the juice you have after and wonder where all your tomatoes went. So you really want to get as much, this is like precious stuff, want to get as much as we can out. Okay, I have my tomato juice, and now let's go back to our preparing the rest of the recipe. So first we are going to prep our glass. So I like using these mason jars as a glass, but you could use any sort of glass is fine. And we're going to salt the rim. So to salt the rim, take a lemon or a lime, take a slice of it, and rub it around the rim of your glass. Then take a small bowl or a plate and put some salt in it. And then rub the rim of the glass in the salt. And that lemon will kind of help the salt to stick to the rim. Okay, once you've done that part, fill your glass with ice. Okay, once you've got your ice in there, we're going to start mixing in all the ingredients. So I'll start with the vodka. And I know someone mentioned virgin Bloody Marys are great, so you certainly don't have to add alcohol to it. Or if you really want to have a good time, you can add extra alcohol. I mean, this whole recipe is totally flexible. But I'm going to add 2 ounces of vodka. If you're not sure about how to measure an ounce, what I'm using is the top of a cocktail shaker. And that is about equivalent to an ounce of liquids. If you have a shot glasses vary, but they tend to be about 1.25 to 1.5 ounces. So you can kind of use that as a measurement. So I'm going to do 2 of these of vodka. And then I'm going to do 4 ounces of our tomato juice. Again, we're kind of the tomato juice is still warm. The ice will cool it down. Now I'm going to squeeze in a lime wedge and a lemon wedge. I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of Tabasco or hot sauce. I have my own hot sauce I make here. 2 teaspoons of that. I'm going to do 2 dashes of Worcester sauce. How am I pronouncing that? Worcester sauce. My wife tells me it's Worcester sauce. Just a dash of that. I like that stuff a lot, so I add a little extra. I'm going to do some horseradish. I'm going to do about 2 teaspoons of horseradish. I'm going to do some smoked paprika, just kind of a dash of that, a dash of pepper, a dash of salt, and I'm going to stir it all together. My horseradish, oh my god, is like not the ideal type, so it's turning it a little white. And then I want to kind of make it look nice, so I'm going to add lemon wedge. We'll add some celery for looks. And voila, we're ready to go. Give it a try. Yeah, I love the spice, like the horseradish and the spice of this drink. Or it's great for the morning, and it's a little earlier where I am than you guys, so I'm drinking a little bit earlier. So while we're enjoying our drinks together, I'd love to like have a discussion about anything we just talked about. We could talk about tomato science, tomato growing, tomato history. So you can just pop those questions into the chat, and we'll be happy to take them.
So at least as far as the science behind it goes, I think, at least for me, the most fascinating thing is that the Bloody Mary, at least chemically speaking, is kind of like a weird, like mixed bag. We're kind of like tricking ourselves on a lot of different levels. So we have the savoriness of the actual tomato juice. So that's a very interesting thing because it's one of the few cocktails that's savory. And then you have the capsaicin in the hot sauce. So that kind of introduces a whole just tricking your brain into thinking that you're drinking something that is hot, but it's not actually hot. And then you have the actual tomato itself. So it's kind of like we're used to drinking alcohol or drinks that are kind of like watery. But this, at least for me, and I assume if you make these with as many things as I did, it kind of becomes like a breakfast smoothie. So I find it interesting that we have created a cocktail that's almost kind of like a meal, and then it's also kind of tricks us on a bunch of levels to make our senses think, oh, well, this is delicious, but it's just a combination of a bunch of weird chemical reactions.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really interesting to me is that the effect that the alcohol has on the flavors of this drink is a little bit different. So I like to drink these virgin all the time, but they do taste different when you put alcohol in them. because there's a couple of flavor compounds in tomatoes that are alcohol soluble. So they become more readily available to your taste buds and to be and also to your retronasal olfaction. So as you swallow the compounds that come back up your nasal cavity into your nose that you smell, they're a little bit more readily available when they've bound with alcohol. So they become more volatile. And so you can taste those a little bit differently. They smell a little bit different. They taste a little bit different. Capsaicin, the spicy chemical, is also alcohol soluble. So if you ever eat a really spicy food, capsaicin is alcohol soluble and fat soluble, but not water soluble. So if you go to drink a lot of water, what ends up happening is kind of like pouring water onto a grease fire. It just kind of splashes everything around. But if you have something with fat in it, like a fatty yogurt or fatty milk or cheese or sour cream, that sort of dissolves things, breaks it down. Or if you have something with alcohol in it, that'll dissolve that capsaicin and sort of wash it out of your mouth. But it's already, so we've got the spicy capsaicin and the alcohol already in this drink, so it makes it a little bit less hot than it otherwise would be, which I think is really fascinating.
Hi, so we have a question.
Yeah, I saw those questions.
What is the best way to harvest and save seeds from heirloom tomatoes?
I'm sorry, Aaron, you were getting a little bit of feedback. Can you repeat that question?
What is the best way to harvest and save seeds from heirloom tomatoes?
Yeah, best way to harvest and save seeds from heirlooms.
Seed saving is a little more tricky than some other seeds, like a pumpkin, which is very easy. So with the tomato seeds, like as you notice, when they're small, and they almost have like this gelatinous coating. So you have to remove that coating. So you get your seeds out and then soak them in water for a few days, and it'll kind of dissolve that coating a little bit. And then you can more easily rinse them off. And this would be with any seed, before you store it, you've got to make sure it dries really well. So kind of like lay them out in a place that has good airflow and is dry. Like lay them on a paper towel, nothing fancy. Lay them out for a week or so, kind of turn them a little bit to make sure every side is drying. Once you know your seeds are totally dry, you just want to store them in something somewhat breathable, like a brown paper bag, and then keep them in a cool, dry place until next season when you're ready to plant them. And then make sure you label them. Very important, because you'll definitely forget which seeds are which. So it's good to have like a good labeling system for your plants. And if you ever want to do a germination test, sometimes that's helpful too, just to like kind of know if you're saving them properly or how viable the seeds you're saving are. You can just usually take 10 seeds, because the percentage is easy to work with 10. Take 10, put them in between 2 damp paper towels, and keep those paper towels damp, for like 5 to 7 days. And then look and see how many of your seeds have sprouted. So obviously if 7 have sprouted, you've got about 70% germination rate with your seeds. And it's good to know that, because say you have 50% germination rate, you just know like plant extra of those, because half aren't going to pop up. Typically a seed company, they like a seed company I really like is Johnny's Seeds. They are like very careful about this, and they kind of guarantee like typically from like 95 to like 99% germination rate. It's going to be a little bit harder for the home gardener to get that. So just know when you save your own seeds, you might have to plant some extra to make up for the ones that don't pop up.
Yeah, I think in some of these colder regions, like we have too, I think it's fairly common for people to germinate indoors to get a little bit of a plant going. And then that sort of also tests the viability. And then once you've got just the, 1 or 2 inch seedling, transferring that outside, that gives you a couple weeks head start, and you get to know which ones are viable before you actually start planting in the ground. This is great, by the way. Cheers. This is really tasty.
Okay, well, this was really cool. Rick, thank you so much for waking up early and taking one for the team and having a Bloody Mary with us this morning. I hope that we can do this again soon. I know that you have a lot of cocktails that you like to make, so maybe we get to do this together again soon. Is there any other questions that anyone may have before we end our time together?
I did see a
Slight
suggestion in the
correction,
chat for using.
Reynoldsburg.
Yes.
Sorry, go
my
ahead.
wife. Yeah. So that city in Ohio is Reynoldsburg. My wife used to live in Reynoldsburg for a hot minute when she was like 8. But yeah, they have an annual tomato festival there in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, not far from Columbus. We had a suggestion in the chat also to use tequila instead of vodka, so make a Bloody Maria. I thought about that. I had some here too. Or corn whiskey, which I thought was a
That
fun
sounds very
suggestion.
interesting.
Do you call it a
Yeah, a
Bloody
little bit of
Maria
moonshine there.
when you change the alcohol?
Yeah, it's tequila, so it's a Bloody Maria.
I've never heard that.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot of really bad jokes like that with Bloody Marys.
Yep. Yeah, so excellent suggestions all around. Thanks again, Rick. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to talk virtually with everyone in Cincinnati. This was a really fun opportunity for me to get to, even though I don't get to see the audience, but I know you're there, so it's great to talk to you guys and talk tomatoes and share a Bloody Mary, especially during this kind of stay-at-home COVID time. This was really fun, so I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, and I guess that is a silver lining. I don't know that we would have even thought to reach out to someone in California if it weren't for the limitations of COVID that we would have even thought to do this. So silver lining, we got to meet a new friend and learn a lot about tomatoes and science together. That's pretty cool. All right, well, thank you all. I believe that we'll be able to share this video again. Okay.
Sorry, I just decided to alienate all the Cincinnati people. Go Browns. I'm about to turn on some football.
My God. You probably don't know about this Cleveland Browns Cincinnati Bengals rivalry, but Rick, but Brian really likes to poke the bear. Really likes to do that. Sorry if we offended anyone, but go Browns.
Go Browns.
All right. Well, thank you all. I believe that we will be able to share this again. So if you've missed anything or want to check it out again, check back on our website, and hopefully we'll be able to share this again soon. So thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.